That must have been quite a party then.
It was a mind-blowing kind of party, yeah, for sure.
Right.
That was my first encounter with John.
Yeah.
Then I had an interesting other encounter. I went to this convention that was called a New Earth Expo. That was a kind of a convention for alternative thinking.
Whole Earth Catalogue type people.
Yes, exactly. A lot of they would have had a big booth there. The Earth Catalog. And but when I was there, I bought two things. I went to two booths where I made purchases. One was I purchased 2 hours in a flotation tank, which I found existed. I'd heard about these things in college, like I'd heard about R.D. Laing. These the things are part of my education in psychology. But I had no idea you could actually go in one.
Right.
So when I found this out, it was like, yes, please, I want to go. And it was in Beverly Hills. They had opened a tank center where they had tanks for rental for an hour at a time.
Wow. You don't get that in London.
Oh, I think they do, actually.
Maybe now they've got them. Yeah.
They've got them pretty much a lot over Europe now. But anyway, so I bought that not knowing that the other thing they were selling there was a book, The Deep Self, written by John, that John had designed the tank that they were selling. And his book, The Deep Self, was all about isolation tank experiences, and that he had pioneered sensory deprivation studies.
Yeah.
Right. And also not knowing, but finding out later that he experimented on himself with those tanks. His whole quest in the early part of his life was that he wanted to find the link between the brain and the mind.
Right.
And part of that was his work doing electrode studies with the brain. He was the first one to introduce electrodes into the brain and stimulate them to find what the brain did and where these avenues were. And he in fact invented the Lilly waveform, which was an electronic pulse that didn't damage the cortex.
Right.
It's still used in prosthetic devices to this day.
Right. What was his training? Was he a brain scientist or
he was an MD,
psychologist?
and he was a neuroscientist. He worked at the National Institute of Mental Health.
Okay.
And this is where he did a lot of his early work. And he did a little sidetrack into inventing high altitude respiration equipment in the early days of aerospace reaching space.
Right.
As people got higher and higher and higher, they needed ways
of
breathing.
Yeah.
And he was doing that, and that actually led him to dolphins.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the dolphin thing, because he reckoned he had communication, didn't he?
Well, he was really interested in intelligence.
Right.
And he longed to find an extraterrestrial intelligence. And when some of his fellow brain scientists came and told him that, actually Tursiops, bottlenose dolphins, have a brain that's 20% larger than human brains. And the reason they did that was because dolphins are conscious breathers. They have to make the choice to breathe because they live underwater.
Right.
They're not like us. So whenever they would anesthetize them to do surgery, to look at their brains, while on a living dolphin, the dolphins would die because
they've got to be awake to breathe.
They've got to be conscious to breathe.
So do they not sleep?
Well, it's theoretically they have a two-part brain like we do, but they have no corpus callosum. There's no connector between the two.
Right.
So they have two independently operating brains.
So the one is the kind of autonomous thing that does when they sleep.
I think that they theorize, at least from what John told me, the theory was that they slept with one half of the brain at a time. So this half
with one eye open type of thing.
Kind of. It's hard for us to imagine, but one of the studies in Man and Dolphin, his book Man and Dolphin, they started noticing that the dolphins, when they were isolated from each other, they would give out a signature whistle, which is what they do out in the wild in murky water. They send out a little whistle that's their own whistle, their own tone.
Like their name type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's akin to saying, "Hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here," and everybody knows those sounds, so all the pod knows where everybody is. And they would, while the hydrophones were off in the tanks, they would give out signature whistles. And as soon as they turned on the hydrophones so they could communicate with other dolphins in other tanks, they would have conversations. And the conversations would be in the form of whistles and clicks. Okay? So they started to notice that when they were recording all these sounds, they started to notice that there would be conversations of whistles, where one dolphin would whistle, 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 and stop, and the other would whistle, 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 and stop. So it looked like human conversation, where there would be some little overlap, but not a whole lot, as they had a conversation. And then they realized that there was another conversation of clicks going on. That kind of thing. That was doing the same thing, but transposed against the other one was totally out of sync. So it was as if they were having two different conversations about two totally different things at the same time. At least that's what John surmised. So it's this incredibly...
So you got to know Foley World, did you, over the years, and you talked to him about this?
Well, you know, I probably talked to him less than received transmissions from him. It's really strange because...
He would hold forth and you would listen.
Well, yeah, there were always a lot of people visiting. I practically lived at their house for a while.
Right.
I was good friends with their secretary, their kind of executive secretary, who lived down the street. They lived kind of on the outskirts of Los Angeles.
And what's happened? Is he and his wife both dead now? Or?
Yes. Yeah. Tony died actually in the mid-'80s, and then John died in 2001.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, while I was there, you know, a lot of people would come to visit, a lot of scientists, and you know, I wish I had it, but I taped a conversation with he and R.D. Lang one morning, and that was pretty outstanding.
That was at Lily's place.
Yeah.
Okay, because he was a friend too.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's all there, kept in the cyber memory, I suppose.
Yeah,
of
maybe.
Of the brain.
But it's funny because when I hear, you know, people talking about the center of the cyclone and things that John said, it says, yeah, that makes sense that John would say that, and it's things that I agree with, but I never read the center of the cyclone. And, you know,
I kind of, you know, lived with it for a while in the late 70s. And the thing that I remember most from that book was his concept of the dyad. He believed, if I'm remembering rightly, that in relationships between human beings, if you're in a sacred relationship, like a love relationship, he called that a dyad. And so when two souls fuse in love, they become a more powerful kind of transmission-receiving device for the universe. And that's the natural state of human beings. We're supposed to be in a dyadic kind of partnership. And that influenced me in my journey exploring relationships and what is marriage, what is sacred sexuality, all that kind of stuff. Because I was celibate for 4 years consciously. Because, you know, I followed the yogic tradition that it's better to be celibate to be a scholar. And then I thought, no, this isn't right. If everybody did celibacy, the planet would die out of humans. So then I said, no, we should be doing sacred relationships, which is what I call a wisdom affair. And the term I use for that is a dyad, which is taken from John Lilly's book. So that's my kind of homage to his influence on me, really.
Well, if you don't mind, I have a question now, because now that we're talking about kind of monastic traditions and spiritual traditions, I'm very interested in the way Druids would have taken to that idea of the dyad. How does that inform you as a Druid?
Right. It's a very interesting question. I mean, what we know of the Druids is that they were the sacred knowledge keepers of northwestern Europe, right, for thousands of years, going right back to the time of Stonehenge, Avebury, and there's about 800 stone circles in Britain. I mean, we're close to Kilmartin here in Argyll, which is one of the earliest sort of
So is Stonehenge just the most famous
one
of those?
Yeah. But there's about 800, you know, they're incredible. And they were built from many thousands BC, you know, on down to the Iron Age. And the ancient peoples of these islands and other parts of northwest Europe believe that we live in symbiotic relationship with all of nature and with the cosmos. So the circles are aligned on different axes to do with the stars and the solstices and equinoxes. I mean, we've just had a solstice celebration here at the castle, which you've been here for. And I suppose it's kind of proto-astrology. I mean, astrology is a sophisticated version of the idea that as above, so below, everything that happens in the heavens is mirrored on Earth. You can take that to extremes, you know, but the Druid teaching would be more that every event is related to every other event. And if you can crack the code, you can read the symmetries and patterns behind existence. There's an inner meaning behind existence, which they put into their art form, the spirals. If you go to New Grange in Ireland, and other places, Gavrinis in Brittany, they have these incredibly complex spiral patterns on the stones which they've engraved. And from the air, the stone circles themselves have this beautiful aesthetic. They're like mandalas. So I think I define the metaphysics of Druidry as paradoxical simultaneity, okay, which is a kind of phrase I've coined to explain what I think those symbols mean. The spiral is that this avenue of the spiral is simultaneous to this avenue of the spiral, to this one. But to make the journey in linear time, it seems to be different. So that the human life experiences, we go from childhood through maturity to old age. The Druids believed in reincarnations, so you come back around for another time, at a different turn higher up the spiral. So we've sat and had this conversation, 10,000 years ago, for all we know.
Oh, speaking of which, I saw a funny cartoon. It was a little boy talking to his father, and the little boy says to his father, "That's okay, I don't believe in reincarnation when I was your age either."
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Oh, if I might interject something, I got a little shiver when you said that about the spiral, because one of the most interesting solstices I spent was when I was working on the Cosmos series with Carl Sagan. Because we were at a kiva in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico,
with the Hopi people.
Anasazi.
Oh, the Anasazi. Okay.
The Anasazi that disappeared. This was around 900. They think these ruins.
Right.
Were from. And we started our morning in a kiva that, as the sun peeked over the horizon, it completely filled an alcove through the wall of the kiva. There's a hole, and the light filled a certain niche. And then as the sun rose, it moved down to another niche and then disappeared. It was like completely filled the niche, moved down, completely filled the other niche, and then disappeared.